Today is such a cool day for me. I've been doing this podcast since April, and I've been getting a lot more engagement on social media, LinkedIn, Twitter. I guess it's just LinkedIn and Twitter. And a few months ago, Dr. Dan Diamond reached out to me. He had been listening to the podcast, and he really enjoyed my conversation with Mark Riley. Remember Mark Riley? Several episodes ago, he was the Deputy Director of Disaster Recovery in the state of Louisiana. And Dan shared that he was there. He was there when Katrina happened. He was there helping triage all of the people that needed medical help. He was with a team of physicians. And he also wrote the book on resilience. Like literally, he wrote the book on resilience. It's called Beyond Resilience. And so here I am after Dr. Dan reached out to me via LinkedIn. We connected. I loved his stories. And now I'm sitting here with Dr. Dan in Bremerton, Washington. What an unbelievable experience. Talk about the power of social media and connecting the story of resilience and all these great episodes to somebody that's out there that has actually lived it, and he wants to share his story with our listeners.
If somebody wants to say, I want to become the most valuable person in my organization, it's not going to be the guy that says, somebody has to look out for number one. Because if you do that a lot, the other people will let you step out in front of a bus. But if you're the guy that becomes the conduit, you become so valuable that people will fight to keep you on the team, even when there's budgetary cutbacks. They will figure out a way to keep you on the team.
Welcome to Resilient, where we hear stories from leaders on risk, crisis, and disruption. And we get those stories by meeting our guests on their home turf. And literally, we meet them on their home turf. As I've talked about before, my name is Mike Kearney. I lead Deloitte's strategic risk practice. And you know what the cool thing is? I have this unbelievably good fortune, kind of a little side job. I'm kind of moonlighting where I get to sit down and I get to hear the stories of some iconic leaders who have gone through some of the most hairy natural disasters, crises, disruption events. We get to hear the stories firsthand. And this morning I woke up and I opened the drapes to my hotel, and we were literally right on the water. And I looked out and I started to think about what are some things that I want to talk to Dr. Dan about. And there's so many things that we could cover. I want to hear about the stories of the disasters he was in. I want to hear about why Dan got into this work and what compelled him to write the darn book on resilience. I cannot wait to hear this. I also want to just hear, does he have any experiences that will relate to senior executives? Remember, we created this podcast for leaders, senior executives, board members, and others. How can we use Dan's experiences and translate them to really helpful lessons learned for those senior executives? So, without further ado, let's jump into our conversation with Dr. Dan Diamond. Let's get into it. I love how we came together. So I actually shared that on our intro a little.
Yeah.
But the power of social media today. The fact that I always say, hey, connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter, and I've been getting a lot more engagement. But you reached out to me and you said, hey, Mike, we got to talk, because I wrote the damn book on resilience. So I was like, that's pretty damn cool.
Well, yeah. Well, it was after listening to the story about Katrina, I thought, you need to hear the other side. You need to hear what happened boots on the ground in the middle of the storm, because it was wild.
I cannot wait. So, one of the things I always ask, and if you've listened to my podcast, the last question I always ask is, so tell me, what do you think a resilient leader is? Or what's somebody that's resilient? What's the attributes? I'm starting out there. When you hear that word, a resilient person, what jumps to mind? And I know this entire conversation is going to be about that, but I just want to get it out on the table right away. What is a resilient person?
That is the question.
That is
for me, because I came back from Hurricane Katrina wanting to understand what is it about some people that they become unstoppable. We knew there were going to be a lot of victims. In fact, we had 50,000 body bags on pallets at the right there at the convention center. And so I wasn't surprised that we saw a lot of victims, but what got me was that some people did not become victims. They were unstoppable, and it had nothing whatsoever to do with resources, because all of us lost resources.
Right.
So even the teams that responded like ours were street people. We were all sleeping on the street. When we got tired, you just kind of laid down in the parking lot and went to sleep. You wake up in the morning with cockroaches flattened that he rolled over on the middle of the night. But we were all just street people, so it wasn't resources. And it took me a while. I came back, did a bunch of reading and pondering and interviewing people to try to understand what it is about some people that they become resilient. And I think it comes down to two dimensions. One has to do with this idea that Julian Rotter came up with back in the 50s of locus of control. So he said that victims have an external locus of control. All the power is external to them, and so they look at it like somebody else has all the power. So you hear them saying things like, and I did hear this in an interview, the person interviewing or being interviewed started yelling at the reporter saying, "When is George Bush going to bring me my food?" And I'm thinking, yeah. He's not.
He's going to be delivering it tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm sure he's working on that right now. So the victims have this external locus of control. Right. What I call the thrivers have this internal locus of control, and they look at it like, no matter what happens, I still can choose how I'm going to respond.
Right.
So that's the first dimension. The second dimension has to do with purpose. So the victims, you could divide the world up into two types of mindsets, not types of people, but mindsets. One is a giver and the other is a taker.
Right.
So the victims are takers. They're looking at it like, well, the resources are scarce. There's not enough stuff to go around, so I have to rally all my supplies, because if I don't look out for number one, who's going to? The thrivers are looking at it like, man, there's plenty to go around. We can make it work. So they look at it like, I always can choose how I'm going to respond, and it's not about me. They're the givers. So they are the powerful givers. The opposite of that are the powerless takers. So the victims versus thrivers. It's kind of it's an interesting perspective. And when you're in the middle of a disaster, it is so raw that this, because
everything's stripped away from everybody.
Yeah. Nobody's hiding behind their houses or their cars or their clothes or anything. There, you just see people as it is, and you can see it very clearly who the victims are and who the thrivers are. And it was fascinating to see.
I want to get into that. We're going to jump into your book in a little bit. The question I have is there a story or somebody that represented maybe the unexpected resilient person? Because my guess is you can't just look at somebody and say, yeah, that's somebody that's going to be resilient, because it comes from within. When Katrina or any of the other disasters you've been in, is there somebody that jumps to your mind where you say, that was the unexpected resilient person?
Yeah, I think one of my most favorite stories from Katrina was about a guy named Augie.
Yes, I love your story about Augie.
And I talk about Augie in my TED Talk. Yep. But he was the one that I think caught me by surprise. Because here's a guy that I suspect did not have a lot of money. I mean, he might have, but I don't think that he did. It's kind of hard to tell. Like I said, nobody had anything, but I don't think he had a lot of money. And when I met him, he came wheeling into our area with a shopping cart with a couple of garbage bags in it and some blankets all rolled up. He had 6 little blankets. And he right away parked his shopping cart off to the side, and he started jumping in and helping, and he was helping us clean wounds and put dressings on. And when new people would come, he would jump up and go get water for them. Looking at this going, wait a minute, you just lost everything except for 3 garbage bags and a couple of blankets. And you're not sitting there going, oh my gosh. I mean, I put my own self in this situation many times, ask myself the question, so if I lost my MacBook Pro and my iPhone,
or your beautiful house, where we're sitting right now,
would I say, I wonder what I could do to help these people out? Or would I take on this mindset of, my life is horrible, it's over, I'm never going to survive this, what am I going to do? And just sit in the corner and weep.
Yep.
So here's a guy that lost everything, and he's jumping up and helping, and he's just part of the solution to the whole thing. He came up to me that night, and it was like 10 o'clock at night. It was a Tuesday night. He says, Doctor, I was wondering if I could have that cardboard over there against the wall. And I hadn't even noticed it. This thing's the size of a mattress.
Right.
And so I look at it and I'm thinking, well, I'm not too sure I want to give you that piece of cardboard that I just
Is this the first time you engaged with him?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I talked to him a little bit during the day, so we knew who each other were. But I'm thinking, I don't know that I want to give you my cardboard. You just pointed it out to me, but I might need it for something.
Right.
And I said, what do you want with the cardboard? And he said, well, you see, doctor, I had 6 blankets and I went around and I covered up all the elderly people, but there was a 7th man. And I was wondering if I could have that cardboard cover him up with that. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, yeah, you can have the cardboard. You can have my kids. You can have my money. You can have my clothes. You can have anything you want, because you just schooled me, because I didn't.
You're like, here I am thinking about myself.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And then he just wants to take care of somebody.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking I might need that cardboard for something. I don't want to give it to you.
Right.
And he's not. He's in a completely different frame. So it really caught me. I think he was the beginning of, beginning of me asking the question of what does it take to be resilient.
So let's move to who is Dan Diamond? And there is the TED Talk. So actually, we just referenced it. Go out there, watch it. It's the Mount Rainier TEDx event, I think, a few years ago. Awesome TED Talk. It was very different, too. Like, I don't know if that was on purpose, but it was a very black background. So it's very artsy how they did it. So I like that. And then, you've obviously written a book as well. But for those of you who don't know Dan, tell us who you are and kind of what makes you tick.
Well, I kind of come from a little bit of a different background. I used to be a street mime in Seattle.
Oh, damn, you took my I was going to ask that question. You're getting ahead of it. I'm teasing. Yep. And that was during your when you were in medical school, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's how I made my spending money going through school.
Yeah.
And it's amazing, if times get tough with your company or whatever, you can always put your hat out, put some makeup on. You can make about $25 an hour if you're good. Wow. It's not a bad deal.
Yeah.
And you get to work whenever you want. The hours are good, but
it's like being an Uber driver.
Yeah, it's exactly the same, only different.
Yeah, exactly.
So I had that whole side of me, and then I've been practicing medicine. I wanted to be a doctor since I was in the 6th grade.
Did you grow up in this area? So we're right now up in Washington, state of Washington.
Yeah, I grew up in Tacoma.
Okay.
And then went to Washington State University for undergraduate, go Cougs, and then went to the University of Washington for medical school, which I don't claim. You can't claim the Huskies, and been on their faculty for 30 years now.
So you grew up here. You wanted to be a doctor since you were a little kid. Any early influencers because we're going to get into your story, and it's a very interesting story, but anything that influenced you when you were younger growing up that almost kind of foreshadowed who you were going to become?
Yeah, one thing that happened was my mom died when I was 10 months old.
Oh, wow.
And she died from a rare type of cancer. So I had an interest in medicine from early on. I have a second mom, not a stepmom, by the way, a second mom that my dad remarried when I was 18 months old. So she's always been there for me. But I've had this interest in medicine. My dad was a pharmacist. He told me, don't be a pharmacist. You should go be a doctor. So
And was it your mom passing early? Do you think that was the inspiration behind going into medical
I think
field?
that was part of it.
Yep.
That and the fascination with medicine, and thinking I really want to be able to help people, and use my brain to help people.
So my mime question was going to be, it's certainly a fun fact, so you've already brought it up, but was there anything that you learned from being a mime that contributed to the way you think, the way you act, the way you problem solve? Is there any linkage there? Or maybe not. Maybe it was just a cool job.
There's a huge link. And first of all, I want to clarify, I was not an obnoxious street mime that followed people and harassed them. I was more like Shields and Yarnell. Those guys, that's San Francisco, your group, your people out there.
My people.
Yeah. And it was, we had some fun times. So I told stories when I did mime. But what I learned was some stuff about improv. Because when you're working on the street and doing street theater with people, you never know what somebody's going to do. I could take a banana and stick up a businessman walking down the street and get his wallet if I do it right.
Right.
Because he's going to be terribly afraid of this banana that has now become a gun in his mind. And then I can flip it around the other way and have the phone ring and hand it off to him, and then turn around and walk away, and he's walking down the street all by himself talking into a banana, and it's really fabulous looking for people to experience that. So the improv piece becomes an interesting part of the problem-solving side of what I do when I go into disasters. So in improv, there's this underlying rule of yes and.
Yep.
So when you're going through difficult times like you don't have any electricity. So you say, okay, we don't have any electricity. Yes, we don't have electricity. And here's what we're going to do to overcome it. Versus, what are we going to do? This is
it's a problem,
horrible.
right?
We don't have any electricity. None of our equipment's going to work. This is terrible. Our world has come to an end. And the whole scene just comes to a screeching halt when you start looking at it like, oh man, as opposed to, oh yeah, and we're going to do this. So yeah, it's
fascinating how that plays off. So then let's get into, so you were a doctor. How did you get involved in your first disaster? Like, I want to go back to like the very first one, because I would imagine, not to put words in your mouth, but have a nice little life. You're a physician. Things are great. But then you choose to go off to some of the most iconic natural disasters.
You got to go back further. I was in medical school and decided that I wanted to do some sort of an international medicine experience. And so 5 days after I got married, my wife and I packed our bags up and went to Thailand and worked in a refugee camp with Hmong refugees for 3 months. And that was, I would say, the most significant part of medical school for me, because I learned some really interesting things about medicine, about how tough people are, and it was quite a bit different than working in Seattle at the University of Washington, taking care of people when you have all this fancy equipment. We would show up. We had X-rays on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, because that was the day that the generator worked.
So if something happened on a Saturday.
Yeah, if you went on Tuesday and you say, well, this guy's sick as a dog, I need to get a chest X-ray on him, they would say, oh, so sorry, it cannot be. No electricity today. Say, okay, great. So we lived about an hour away by van. So we get in the next morning. We get there about 8 o'clock in the morning, get off the van and say to the guy, all right, now I need a chest X-ray. And they say, oh, so sorry, it cannot be. The generator's not working today. And that kind of stuff happened a lot.
Right.
And you have to learn how to diagnose without having all the fancy equipment and the lab and all that stuff. So my interview skills and my exam skills got much better working in that situation than I think they would have been if I would have stayed in the United States the whole time. But once you go do international stuff like that, it just,
it becomes part of your DNA.
Yeah, you start looking at the world differently.
So how did your wife react? Like, did you say 10 days after you got married? Was she
it was 5 days.
5 days. Yeah. That is like you win the award for a great honeymoon.
No. And in fact, I don't recommend doing that. I think it was a lousy plan, but it was the only time that we could do it during my training to make it fit into the schedule. But yeah, she was a trauma nurse at Harborview in Seattle. So it didn't take too much nudging to get her to come.
Yeah. So you do that, then how do you then connect that to getting into, some of these disasters that you've been involved with? Was it just, like you said, just part of who you were, so that was now going to be part of kind of the rhythm of your life? I'm going to do this periodically, or?
Well, back in 1991, Youth for Christ was putting on these events that were at D.C., Washington, D.C., and in L.A. They called the conference series DCLA. It happened every 3 years. And my buddy was in charge of security for the event in D.C. They had 20,000 junior high and high school kids there. And most of it was in the Washington Convention Center, but they did a big event on the grassy mall in front of the Capitol.
Right.
It was 104 degrees. They had 400 kids pass out. The fire department came in, hosed the crowd down. The police shut the event down, and they said, you guys weren't prepared, so next time you have to have your own medical team. So he called me and said, here's what just happened. You're on the next, when I do this again in 3 years, you're in charge of the medical. I'm going, yeah, great. I don't have any idea how to do big crowd medicine. So I asked around and found out who were the best big crowd medicine guys in the country, and it was Glenn Raswick at Rock Medicine out of the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic. So I called him up and I said, hey, we've got a bunch of Christian guys that need to take care of these kids out in Washington, D.C. Can we come and do a concert with you? And he said, oh, yeah, sure. Well, he told me later he thought that we would wear our little white shirts and ties and lean up against the walls and go, ooh, ooh. But, we're both trauma people. So we jumped in and helped clean people up. And, they didn't care if they threw up on us and all that kind of stuff. And he said afterwards, hey, you guys are pretty cool. we're getting ready to do the Grateful Dead shows in Seattle. Do you want to do them with us? Because we flew down to Oakland Stadium and did the Pink Floyd concert with them. And then they brought us.
I think I was at, what year was that? Like the early 90s?
1993.
I think I was probably there. That's pretty, at least I didn't come to your medical tent.
Not that you remember anyway.
Not that I remember.
Yeah, we had a special part of the tent called the Space Station. Whoa. But so we did the Grateful Dead shows with them, and then we ended up doing Smashing Pumpkins and Metallica, and we went on to become Seattle's Bumbershoot Festival, their big music festival. We were the lead medical team for that. And then we started thinking, we could probably do disaster stuff. So we contacted Medical Teams International and started partnering with them, and then getting deployed to Hurricane Pauline and Hurricane Mitch, and then I also did some work in India, a couple of trips over to India to work in an orphanage hospital, and then was one of the founding board members for an organization called Children of the Nations, and so I did one trip over to Sierra Leone, which was a fabulous experience.
So how is it different? Can you just explain for the layperson? So if you're providing medical care in kind of large-scale events, how is that different from, other than kind of the scale of it, how is that different from providing medical care, say, in an emergency room? Just trying to understand, because you said, we were asked to do it. It was something new. We hadn't done it before.
It's a completely different thing. For one thing, you don't have all the lab, you don't have all the equipment, we don't have x-ray, and it's not a nice, quiet environment where you could say, everybody be quiet, I need to listen to this person's lungs.
Is there a different type of skill that you need in order to do that? Can all medical doctors be transported into kind of large-scale medical treatment, or no? I'm asking the question.
Most would run away.
I'm asking the question because I'm not a doctor, and I'm trying to understand, the mindset of being in an emergency room versus, out at a Grateful Dead concert, for example.
Well, emergency rooms, you never know what's going to come in.
Sure.
But when you're in the Grateful Dead concert, you're right smack dab in the middle of it, and all kinds of crazy stuff is happening all around you, and it's noisy, and so you become a very astute observer, and you can't depend on the usual tools that you can in the emergency room.
Okay. So you mentioned that do you get deployed through, you said it was Medical Teams International? Is that the primary group? Can you maybe just share a bit about them? I've done my research, but maybe for the audience, what is Medical Teams International? What's their purpose, their cause? Maybe if you could share a bit about that.
It's an amazing organization. It's doing disaster work is really difficult to do it well. And I would define doing it well as being in the right place at the right time to get the right work done.
The logistics of it, in many respects. Yep.
It's so hard because when disaster happens, a lot of people will say, oh man, I got to do something. And so they jump on a plane and they show up. So, we were down in Haiti, and we had this hospital, King's Hospital, that we got back online and got it up and running. We had some orthopedic surgeons on our team, and they're working. They got operating rooms going all day long. We couldn't work at night because it was too dangerous at night. And a group shows up and says, hey, we're a bunch of orthopedic surgeons, and we've got a nurse anesthetist with us. We would love to come in and help. I said, I don't have any space for you. I only have 2 operating rooms. I only have 2 anesthesia machines. They said, well, do you know where we could work? I said, nah, you need to go back to the command center and find out where they want to deploy you to. Oh, okay. Well, where do you guys stay? I said, oh, you don't have a place to stay. They said, no. I said, well, we're at a safe house about, 10-minute drive. They said, oh, where do you get your water? I said, oh, you don't have water.
It's all the basic necessities that you don't take into consideration.
And then, where do you get your food? So,
right.
Oh, you guys don't have food. Because when we come in, we're completely self-sufficient for the first 2 weeks. So we have our own water. We have our water filtration. We bring in all of our own food. We eat the MREs, the meals ready to eat that the military has. And we bring in our own tents. And, we don't always end up using all that stuff if we can find resources. But a lot of people will just show up.
Right.
And then they become part of the problem because it's more people that need housing.
Right.
And Medical Teams International has a great international network of people. So when we show up, we usually have a pretty good idea of where we're going to work and what our initial objectives are. It's hard to do. It's a great organization. The other thing I really like about the folks that are running Medical Teams International is they don't care who gets the credit. There are some other organizations that are well known worldwide that are very.
Can you unpack when you say get the credit? I mean, I get what that means, but who's looking for credit in these other organizations you're talking about? Is it the people running the organization? Is it the,
you get egos. You know, people show up and they're like, "We're here now. We've got it. We don't need your help. Don't ask to borrow any of our stuff, and we don't need any of your help because we're cool. We got it.
We know what we're doing, right?
Yeah. Which is different than showing up and saying anything that we have is yours if you need it. It's not about our team. It's about you guys. We are here to serve. It's not about us. It's about helping the people here. And so when we go to the cluster meetings that are run by the United Nations and World Health Organization, we go with the attitude of, here's what our resources are. We're happy to help. You're welcome to our resources. And we develop those. It's one of my primary goals when I first get boots on the ground is build relationships with the other people that are there so that I can help them be successful and they can help me be successful.
So how often do you actually get deployed to a crisis situation? Is it when a crisis happens? Do you budget like a certain amount of, it sounds silly, but like, hey, I'll do this once a year? What's the cadence of that?
There's really not a cadence to it. People ask me, so when's the next disaster going on?
Obviously, we don't know that. But is it something that if we had 3 or 4 hurricanes in one year, you potentially could be deployed 3 or 4 times, or
usually not? Usually it's once a year. So maybe every other year. My most recent deployment was to the Philippines, which was 3 years ago.
Wow. And do you always have, you talked a bit about this. It sounds like Medical Teams International is very well organized, but do you have a plan going in, or are you like the Navy SEALs where you kind of just go in and you understand what's going on and then you adapt to the situation, or is it kind of somewhere in between?
We usually have an objective of what we're trying to do, but how that happens is flexible once we get there, and things rapidly shift. In fact, we don't let people go on the first in teams until they've proven themselves in later phase response, because they can show up and get really cranky. Like, I thought you told me I was going to have a bed. Right. I thought you said we were going to have mosquito nets on the outside of the windows. This is not
what I signed up for.
I didn't sign up for this. We get there, and I've been deployed to a disaster where I spent the first 3 days in an office building sleeping on the carpet.
Wow.
At Hurricane Mitch. Because the logistics didn't work, and they couldn't get us deployed to the place where they needed us to be. So we just had to sit there, which was, it makes you go nuts when I just hit the eject button on my life. I got people covering my shifts and everything, and I'm just sitting down here, sleeping on the floor, having a nice day, waiting for them to figure out how they're going to get my team to where we need to go.
So in moments like that, do you ever reflect and say, why am I doing this? Or is the cause so big that it's like, I get why I'm doing this and I have to go through sleeping on the floor or whatever it may be?
I don't think the why am I doing this question hit me as much as why am I not where I need to be?
Right.
And that's a bigger deal.
So I'm here and I want to do it, but I'm not being used in the right way.
And I know I have lots to offer, but I can't from where I am.
Which goes back probably to the organization comment that you made earlier.
And it's a tough thing. That deployment was not with Medical Teams International. It was with a different organization. But you never really know. So we spent in that deployment, they finally sent us to a town called Moralica, and it took us 2 or 3 days to get there on some of the scariest 4-wheel driving I have ever done. So, you're leaning at about 30 degree lean in this 4-wheel drive truck, looking out the window, and right there, staring in my face, is the root stock of a big tree. And I'm thinking, if this truck rolls, I'm going to be shish kebabbed in about 50 places. At one point, I said, "Stop the truck! I'm getting out of the truck, and I'm going to walk across this. This is, no, I'm not doing this." So we spent a couple of days getting there, only to find that the Mexican government had airlifted their teams in, and they'd already treated all the patients, and all the work was done. So then we grabbed a helicopter and flew back to the base. After that, we found one sick guy that needed to have his appendix out, and we said, "We need a helicopter." And I don't know if it was so much that he needed a helicopter or I just didn't want to go back on that road again. So, but anyway, we stole somebody else's helicopter and got back to base.
So let's go into Katrina, because you were at the epicenter of it, and I think one of the things, and I don't remember if this was from your TED Talk or your book, but you said it was post-apocalyptic. I have a hard time saying that. No rules. Can you describe what it was like when you came in? And I think there was a story you talked about where you was it search and rescue where even they were lost?
Yeah,
And you're like,
yeah,
what
yeah.
the hell? Where
Yeah.
where are we? But can you
Oh,
just
yeah.
kind of share what
Yeah,
it was
you
it
need
like
to-
coming
you need
into
to
New
cue
Orleans?
in the eerie music because
have some?
yeah,
Yeah.
it was like we got initially deployed to Lafayette, and there was 10 of us. And then
For those who aren't familiar with Louisiana, how far is Lafayette from New Orleans?
oh man, I don't remember now because we got lost. So it was a couple hours away.
Okay, yeah, it's not 5 miles down
No,
the road.
it was, yeah. So we were up there, and they were and they had all these people in the gymnasium that they were taking care of in the shelter, and it was a going concern. It was really busy, but I got a call from the vice president of Medical Teams International, a friend of mine named Bill Essick, and Bill says, "Can you split the team in half? We need you down here in New Orleans." I said, "Of course we can split the team in half. Yeah, I'm sure. What time? We're coming right now." So we reloaded, put all our stuff back in the SUV, and headed out of town.
Mm-hmm.
You had to go through 2 police barricades. Now these are high quality police barricades where the cops have sawed off shotguns.
Right.
And it's just like you're not going to mess with them. So we had to be able to prove to them. They had to radio to all these people and make sure that we were legit. Once you got past the second police barricade, it was like kind of a time travel bizarre experience of going. There was no street lights. There were no signs. All the signs were knocked down, and you could drive as fast as you wanted to down either side of the freeway.
So it was like the Autobahn. But that's probably not a time where you really wanted to take advantage of that.
Oh, yes,
Or maybe-
we did.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Oh, yeah. We were going 100 miles an hour down the freeway, just screaming down this, and then we thought, we really don't know where we are. We should be at the convention center by now, And so I took an exit, and there's another SUV, and I go up there and knock on the window, and I said, "Hey, my name's Dan Diamond with Medical Teams International, and we're lost. We're trying to find the convention center." And they said, "Well, yeah, we're search and rescue, and we're lost too." I thought, oh man, they just, you can't even explain what that's like because it was just so weird and so wrong. But then we finally found our way. We just got back on the freeway, kept driving like maniacs, and in the middle of the night got there and began to set up shop.
Got to the Superdome.
No, we went to the convention center.
You went to the convention center first.
Superdome had already been shut down at that point.
Okay.
And the convention center was the only functioning medical facility in the whole city of New Orleans.
And where is the medical or the convention center in relation to downtown New Orleans? Was it underwater or?
No, it's close to the water though.
Okay.
It's, in fact, part of the time we slept in the warehouse along the Mississippi River for the Mississippi Delta Queen.
Wow.
Which, that's where the cops were sleeping. So we went and stayed with the cops because they had food. In fact, they had good steaks and good jambalaya.
So Dan, you referenced this earlier, but I want to unpack this. You said, and tell me if I'm right or wrong, but I think you had been quoted as saying that Katrina was a wake-up call for you. But you just talked about the fact that you've been in other natural disasters. You've been all over the world. What was different about Katrina?
Well, in your other podcasts, you've talked about, when people get to that point where they have this aha kind of pivotal moment,
right,
where everything shifts. And for me, Katrina was that. It was realizing that it was about mindset. Like I mentioned, that I could always choose how I was going to respond. Viktor Frankl talked about that a lot in Man's Search for Meaning.
Right.
That nobody can take away your right to choose how you're going to respond to any given situation. It's the last of human freedoms, he called it. So that became very real to me. That and seeing that even though people lost everything, they could still choose to give the little that they have. And they seem to be coming out ahead of the people that were not doing that, the people that looked like victims. That said, it's all about me and nobody's meeting my needs and when's George Bush going to bring me my few. Those guys didn't do so well. But the people that looked at it like, I'll jump up and do whatever I can to help the people around me, they really did well.
And was it your reflection? What I'm interested in is, what was it about Katrina? Was it more just maybe the aggregation of all of these experiences over many, many years where you finally said, wow, I think I've come to this realization that people can choose their own response in many respects, in the worst of circumstances, and now I'm shining a bright light on it. Was it kind of the aggregation of?
Yeah, I think it was a lot of things that just came together for me, and there was also a shift that happened after Katrina, where I went from looking at disasters and thinking, this is how we manage disasters, and this is how we do what I call disaster improv, where we get in and start problem solving and doing all that stuff. And then one day I kind of went, wow, the rest of the world needs to know this. When you look at what businesses are going through right now, and they're trying to figure out how do they engage and get great work done when resources are scarce. They've got budgetary cutbacks that are happening. How do they keep their head in the game? Do they go to victim mentality or victim mindset and say, oh, it's over? This is and I got to look out for number one, and there's so many regulations. What can a guy do? You just kind of got to throw your hands up in the air and say, well, my life sucks and it's over, or do you look at it and say, well, the world's changing, but I always have the right to choose how I'm going to respond. It's not about me. I will do anything I can to make the other people successful around me. And so making that shift from this is a disaster thing to I can help people that are in other worlds other than the disaster world, in the business world, in the healthcare world. And in fact, I'm going to quit practicing medicine full time the end of December to speak full time and to lead workshops and mentoring and facilitating to help organizations be able to move from this victim mindset mentality into engaging.
It's and I don't know if this is a proper parallel, but we've done studies at Deloitte, and I don't even think it's a Deloitte thing. I think most people would recognize it. But some of the best innovations in the world is where you starve the investment, where people are so focused on what the underlying purpose or cause of, because they believe in it. So damn it, they'll work all night long. They'll figure out a way. And in some respects, I actually almost sometimes think that that's a better way to innovate, because when you get all of the resources thrown at you, then you've got more excuses. And so I don't know if that's a proper parallel, but it's interesting to me because what you're saying is people can thrive when you suck all of the support and resources out, and it truly is about mindset.
Yeah, but I'm not saying you should starve your people.
I'm not. No. But I'll just give you examples at our firm. I mean, a lot of times we're looking to build the next big thing.
Yeah.
And there's always so much conversation of what's the budget? How many hours are you going to give me? And I think one of the things that we find is the innovations that are, and I'm using this parallel still, the innovations that are most successful is when you've got a little skunkworks team that has no money, no time, and every constraint imaginable, and they still do a better job.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're, to a certain degree, getting at.
Yeah, it's amazing what people can do when they decide to become fully engaged and they start thinking with this mindset of a thriver. When I look at, and some of the stuff I've been doing recently looks at the junctions between teams, and this is fascinating to me. It's the levees failed in over 1,000 places in New Orleans after Katrina, but in some of the key places where it failed were the junction between two different jurisdictions. And you know how that goes, right? One team's going, well, that's not our job, that's their job. The other guy's going, well, that's not our job, that's their job. And so you end up with, like, there were some places where the wall was 2 feet taller than the section next to it. So then when you have overtopping that happens, all that stuff that's on the high side comes around that corner, spills over the wall in a huge way, and that one spot causes massive erosion. Right. The wall starts to move forward just a little bit at the beginning, and then it starts to go a little bit more, and then boom, it breaks. And there were some places where the gap was 1,000 feet. There was a whole barge that came through there and just squeegeed the houses off the ground. And so you start thinking, well, what would it be like if the teams would have said, it's not about us. We want to do anything we can to make the other team look like heroes. And so even if just one team would say that, then you end up, they would say, we could, if they don't want to change the height, let's just do a gradual. We'll come up and meet them, but we'll do it over a quarter of a mile.
Right.
And then you have a stronger wall. So in an organization, I think about in healthcare. One day, and when I was pondering this, I thought, I got to go down and talk to the guys in the lab. So I went down there and I said, hey, is there like 2 or 3 things I could do differently to make your life better? And it was as if they didn't need to think about it.
They're like, how about 200? Yeah.
It was as if they'd already had meetings and been talking about it for years.
Right.
You know, they said, yeah, there's like, just do these 3 things differently. So I went back upstairs, made some changes. It didn't take very long before they started coming back upstairs and saying, hey, is there anything we could do differently? I said, well, yeah. I got a couple things you guys could do. And now that place, that wall, that junction is a strong spot in our organization, because one of us went down and said, what can I do differently? How can I make you guys successful? I don't care if I get the credit. I want you guys to look good. So that starts changing this dynamic. You know, when I think about problem solving and disaster improv, this will be interesting to see what you think as a Deloitte consultant, because you guys have such a great reputation. When you're looking at in the business world, you do a gap analysis.
Right.
You know, you're at point A, you got to get to point B. In my world, in a disaster world, that will get you killed.
You don't have the time.
Or you don't see the risk. So if you and I are on the way to dinner and we see a car accident and it's a car versus a truck.
Right.
And the car's on fire. So we run over there and get the fire extinguishers. Point A, car's on fire. Point B, car should not be on fire anymore. Very simple. So we're getting our fire extinguishers and we're pulling the people out of the car and, trying to get the fire out. And then we hear a funny noise. And we look, and there's a big white truck, and it says Suburban Propane on the outside of it. And that's the last thing we know. And it blows up, and that's the end of the story. That's how the problem with this gap analysis is it doesn't think about or consider risk. So then smart people came up with, well, we should do a SWOT analysis.
Right.
Well, that's the SWOT analysis, in my opinion, is beautiful if you want to generate committees that just have more committee meetings, because people are looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I just kind of simplify that down to there's risks and resources. So the gap analysis is a one-dimensional line.
Right.
The SWOT analysis is a 360-degree view. If you overlay those, now you have movement. You're going from A to B, and you're looking at risks and resources.
Right.
So that's a two-dimensional view. It occurred to me one day that you could look at this from a three-dimensional perspective, and this gets fascinating. This is where you look at the interfaces between teams. If you think about your sphere of influence is made up of a bunch of slices. You're on one slice.
Sure.
Your slice has a point A, it has a point B, it has risks and resources. So it's a nice round slice. But the slice right above you also has a point A and a point B and risks and resources. In fact, I learned in physics that a sphere is just a bunch of slices all stacked up on top of each other. The most valuable people in any organization are the ones that will say, it's not about me. I want to figure out what's going on in this organization and how I can become a conduit. So you start looking at, well, the guys in the lab say that they're really struggling with this, and the guys in billing say they're struggling with this, but the guys in the lab have already solved this problem. And then I can, plug them together and say, hey, you guys need to meet because you can solve each other's problems. You guys know what you're doing. You just don't know that each other are doing this. So it's a different way of looking at it. If you start asking questions, and I do this in disasters. If you start asking questions like, what keeps you up at night? So when I'm meeting the other team, so if I'm working with the Israelis, or the Brazilians or the Japanese, it's how you guys doing? Or
right.
The Air Force, when we were down in Haiti, what's keeping you guys up at night? Oh man, well, we don't have any place to put body parts. I said, oh, that's a bummer. I'll take your body parts. Really? I said, yeah, I could take care of that because we got a place to deal with them. We got an incineration thing going on. So
right.
we can solve that problem. It's like the most incredible weight had just been lifted off that person. But if I would have just been looking at my slice on my point A and point B, I would have missed the opportunity to strengthen that interface. And I think the organizations that are going to do really well are the ones that are going to look at the whole sphere rather than looking at one slice. And if somebody wants to say, I want to become the most valuable person in my organization, it's not going to be the guy that says, somebody has to look out for number one. Because if you do that a lot, the other people will let you step out in front of a bus. But if you're the guy that becomes the conduit, you become so valuable that people will fight to keep you on the team, even when there's budgetary cutbacks. They will figure out a way to keep you on the team.
You know, as you're going through this, it just I guess many things are coming to mind. One is the need. It's more than collaboration. Need to work across. I'm trying to apply this just to kind of, corporate America. There is this need to work across the silos. That's actually, whenever we go into organizations, that's one of the things that most people talk about, especially from a risk perspective, all those damn silos. And the fact that they don't understand what the other silos are doing, or there's risks over there that potentially have a pervasive impact across the entire organization. So I think there's this notion about collaboration working across silos. But you also brought up, I think, probably the most important point is, and I wrote down ego, is about not having an ego and putting the needs of others above your own. So the more that you work across the organization or the disaster or whatever it may be, you check your ego at the door and you look about having empathy for them and trying to help them. That's when organizations thrive. I don't know if I got that right, but I was trying to put it into my own, the way I look at the world.
It comes down to economy.
Right.
So you either look at a disaster or a difficult situation as there being a scarcity economy or an abundance economy. If you look at it from a scarcity economy, you have got to get all the supplies you can, pull them into your zone so that you can survive and you'll be okay. But if you have an abundance economy, you look at it and say, well, it's not about me. I got plenty of stuff, and I'm sure I can replace this stuff. It'll work. And then you start giving to other people. You start making them successful, then they start flipping around. Like when I went down and talked to the lab, they were shocked that I went down there and talked to them. And it didn't take very long before they came back up and the law of reciprocity, that if I do it for them, pretty soon they're coming back up and saying, well, what can we do for you?
You move to purpose.
Yeah.
Move to purpose. Yeah. So I love this. I would tell everybody, is this model on your website? I think the web model is on your website as well. It's definitely in your book.
Yeah.
Okay. I tell everybody to go look at it because I think it's powerful, because it is about mindset. I also would say it's also about choice to a certain degree. And the reason why I was asking about the role that you have, I think sometimes people limit themselves where they say, like, I'll give you an example, a new consultant at Deloitte. Oh, I really can't make that big of an impact on a client. And I say, oh my gosh, you don't understand. When you juxtapose your experiences versus mine, you are so much more in the world of kind of technology, social media. Like there are so many things that you can bring. And to me, it's about making a choice of having that or taking that power.
Yeah.
And it's not just about level, role, responsibility. Which for me, I don't know if I'm onto something or if that's the way you look at it, but to me, the choice is a big component of being powerful or having the power.
In fact, I think you can boil down our whole conversation to 3 words: choose to serve. It's you always have that choice.
Right.
It's much more comfortable to be able to sit back and say somebody else should do something. In fact, I would say, and here's an interesting twist, and we can spend some time kicking this idea around. We have gone from being, when I was a kid, a hero-centric society to being a victim-centric society.
Right.
So when I was a kid, we used to say, when I grow up, I want to be like that.
Right.
Most of my buddies and I wanted to be astronauts. Oh man, Neil Armstrong, you imagine walking on the moon. We looked at that and thought, when we grow up, we want to be like those guys. Now we've shifted, and we've shifted to become a victim-centric society. And there's some good reasons why we've done this. One of them has to do with the fact that it's a lot easier to be a victim. So if I'm thinking I need to clean my garage, all I need to do is watch an episode of Hoarders, and then I can go, well, at least my life's not that bad. So it's like, the student that says, when I say, how are your grades? And they say, well, I'm not getting any Fs.
Right.
So, well, which direction are you facing? Are you facing well, at least I'm not a hoarder.
Right.
Versus, man, have you seen some of these guys with these garages? They got a place for everything. I need to get my act together. So if we look at the heroes, then we're challenged to move up. If we look at the victims, we say, well, I guess I'm okay. I think I'll stay on my couch. My garage can
I'm better
wait.
off. Yeah.
So that shift is subtle, but I think is impacting us globally in the United States as we shift into this victim centric society, there are other societies in the world that are going to pass us by because they're looking at it like we're not staying here. We're shooting for this. We're going to go for the gusto.
So why did you? I think we probably talked a lot about this, but why did you write the book? So you came back. Maybe talk about after you came back from Katrina. You started to really kind of search about what makes people resilient. What was the timing from that? I think the book came out just a year ago, right? 2015?
Yeah, just a year ago.
Yeah. So it was a 10-year gap in time. So how did you get to the book? What inspired you to write Beyond Resilient?
Well, I came back from that realizing that this can't just be about me.
Yep.
It can't be, I had these great experiences. I'm just going to put it on the shelf and say, oh, that was awesome. I got to be involved in Katrina and Typhoon Yolanda and Hurricane Mitch and Haiti. And all.
Yep.
It's like, you can't just put that on the shelf. That's a waste, because the experiences that I've had have given me insight that I want to take into organizations to help them to make an impact. Because really at the core, I want to move our society, bump us back into becoming hero-centric and not victim-centric. And that's going to happen with people in the organization saying, I don't care who gets credit. I don't care if anybody even knows that I did this. I'm going to do this because I want the other team in my organization to look great. Or take it outside the organization and say, our company will do whatever we can to make the other company that's working on this project look like heroes. And we honestly, truly don't care who gets the credit. The other company will know.
Right.
And that's going to totally change that dynamic. And then you become a valuable partner. Your company becomes the one on the next project where they're saying, hey, we're not going to do it if they're not involved.
So gratitude. I am fired up to talk to you about this. And I think you wrote in your blog that people who regularly practice gratitude have been shown to experience happiness, longevity, optimism, alertness, enthusiasm, determination, attentiveness, and higher energy levels. So talk about gratitude in the whole context of this resilient conversation.
Yeah. Gratitude is, and now we're on the kind of the cutting edge of what I'm learning personally. So I'm going to just kind of invite you backstage, and you can see how my brain is changing literally, and how I'm understanding, because this has been an interesting year for me. My wife has been very sick and in and out of the hospital this year, and it's been a challenging time. So I've had an opportunity to apply this firsthand, and the research on gratitude is so rock solid. But if I came in and said to you, hey, Mike, I got something for you here. It's a little pill, and it's going to make you live longer. You're going to feel better. You're going to have more energy. You're going to go, yeah, it either doesn't exist or it's illegal.
Right.
You're not going to believe me on this because it's just too good to be true. Well, this data is rock solid data. And it's really easy to do. So one of the studies looked at keeping a gratitude journal. So you write down in this gratitude journal 3 new things that you're thankful for on a daily basis. Now, it can't be repeats. You can't have, well, I'm thankful that I have a warm shower. I'm thankful I have a car and a house. You can't use those over and over again. So eventually you run out of all the easy stuff.
Right.
And you start looking at other things, like the one that I always laugh at now is, I'm thankful that oranges come in slices, because I can eat a couple slices of an orange, go see a patient, come back, and it still looks like an orange. An apple, on the other hand, looks like a science project
right,
when you come back.
Right.
So, it's kind of a silly little thing. But now when I eat oranges, I smile, and my brain goes, yeah, those oranges are pretty cool, aren't they? And it makes me laugh a little bit, which releases serotonin and dopamine in my brain and causes all kinds of cool chemical changes that makes my brain go, yeah, life is good. Life is good. So one of the studies showed that if you will write down 3 new things every day, and you need to pause and kind of look at them and feel it. You can't just write it down brain dead. You need to look at it and go, yeah, oh, that is good. I'm glad that I have a hot shower. Hot showers, that's a good thing, because I lived in Thailand where I didn't have a hot shower, and it was not fun to start the day out with a cold bucket of water over my head. So this is good. Yeah. And you feel it. They found that if you do that every day for a week and then stop, and they had the study group versus the control group, 6 months later, the study group was happier than the control group. 6 months after 1
Just
week
1 week of
work.
doing it. Yep.
What if you just did it on an ongoing basis? So one of the apps that I use is the 5-minute journal. It's an iOS, Droid people. I'm sorry, they don't have it, but it's an Apple app.
Yep.
And I just write down 3 things that I'm thankful for every day. 3 things that I'm going to do to make today great. And at the end of the day, I write down in there 3 things that went well during the day.
So you do it at the beginning of the day.
Beginning of the day,
then
end of the day. Takes me 5 minutes. It makes a profound difference in how my noggin works.
So what made you, was it the research that drove you into that, or was it your personal situation where you just started to do it organically and just you figured out, well, actually there's research that supports how I feel now?
Yeah, I mean, I went through a dark time.
Yeah.
It was really, really a tough year, and I knew that I needed to get out of this hole, and I was aware of the research on it. I thought, well, I'm going to try it. I mean, how hard can it be to write down 3 things you're thankful for every day? It's amazingly effective. It really is. But that I would call gratitude 1.0, and there is gratitude 2.0. And gratitude 2.0 I learned about a year ago when I spoke at the TEDx Rainier meeting. And there was a friend of mine there named Dr. Tanmeet Sethi. And she spoke, and she talked about the difference between being thankful during, which is what we're talking about now, that's gratitude 1.0,
Right,
versus being thankful for. And then the difference between those two is phenomenally important.
Wait, say that again. So thankful during versus thankful for.
Yeah,
Can you unpack that a bit?
Yeah, I can be thankful during. So, you could, if you broke your ankle
Right.
walking out of my house, please don't. But if you break your ankle walking out of my house, you could be thankful during that. You could say, well, I'm thankful that I'm going to get some ice cream out of this deal because my mom always gives me ice cream when I get hurt.
Right.
And I'm thankful that I'll probably get upgraded to first class when I fly back. And you can find things that'll be good versus being thankful for the fact that you broke your ankle. Oh, yeah. That look that you just gave me is the one that my brain did when I heard her talk.
Heard that. Like,
I
why
thought,
would I be happy that I broke my ankle?
Yeah, really. Well, she said that suffering equals pain times resistance. So you got a bad ankle that hurts. It's painful.
Right.
If you fight that and you say, my life is miserable, this is horrible, I'm going to have crutches, it's going to cause chafing, I'm not going to be able to do anything, I'm not going to be able to go to a football game because I can't go up down the stands, I'm not going to be able to drive, what am I going to do? How am I going to travel? I got to do my podcast. I got to travel all over the place with my team and record people. I got to do that in person because it's my passion. But now I got a broken ankle. The podcast is all going to be derailed. What are we going to do? This is horrible. Now you have a broken ankle and a whole bucket of misery to go with it.
Right.
Versus, well, I got a busted ankle. I'm probably going to learn some cool stuff from this one. This is going to be all right. I'm going to get through this. I'm thankful I got a busted ankle. I'm thankful that it's going to be all right because I'm going to learn some stuff through this. It's going to be okay.
Meaning,
for it.
I'm not going to be able to travel. I can spend more time with my family. Is that kind of what you're getting at? Or is it literally, I'm thankful that this happened to me because something good is going to come out of it?
Yeah, it's going to change who I am.
Okay.
I'm going to learn some different stuff about gratitude that I didn't know before. I'm going to be a different person because of this whole experience, and I'm going to come out the other end of it.
And
happy.
so you connect that back then. So did you see this manifest itself in some of the folks that you called the resilient people in time of natural disaster, where you're like, now looking back, I could see, like, I think we keep going back to Augie, but Augie may have been just, grateful for the fact that this allowed him to connect and give back to the city of New Orleans.
Yeah.
I want to close this up. This has been a fantastic conversation. I think we're going to have to do this again at some point in time. But you talked earlier about you want more heroes in this country.
Yeah.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think American Red Cross named you their real hero. I'm curious, if you want to share that a little, that's great. But I'm curious, who's your hero?
The ultimate hero for me would be Jesus, because he put other people first and laid it down and paid the ultimate price.
Right.
So that's like my ultimate example of, you talk about impacting the world. That was he had a phenomenal impact. But boy, a couple of guys that I look up to. One would be one of my best buddies, Chris Clark, the guy that started Children of the Nations. He came back he grew up in Africa, and wanted to take it. Then he moved here, so he's kind of different. He's not really an African. He's not really an American. He's not African American because he's a white guy.
Right.
And he wanted to take his wife to explain to her why he's different. So he took her to Africa, to Liberia.
Yep.
And when he came back, he sat in my living room. This was 1991, I think. He sat in my living room weeping, saying, I got to quit my day job. I got to do something to take care of these orphan kids in Africa. Are you in? I said, well, of course I'm in. I'm your best buddy. Yeah, of course I'm in.
Sure, I'll help.
Yeah, sure. So that's 20-some years ago, and we're now taking care of over 20,000 kids worldwide.
Why did he? What compelled him during that? If he grew up there, what compelled him during that trip to say, "I need to change my entire life"?
I think he saw it from a different perspective, because he lived it.
Right. That's why I asked. Yeah.
Left and then came back and went, "Oh wow." Sometimes you don't see something until you leave, and then you come back, and then you see it for the first time.
Yep.
And it made such a huge impression on him. And so we sat around in the living room thinking about what would the mission statements be. It's not like just taking care of kids to feed the kids, but the mission statement that we came up with was raising these orphan and destitute kids to transform their nations. So we're raising kids to think it's not about them and what they can get, but it's about how they can invest in their own nations and transform their nations.
Well, that goes back to your definition of purpose, right?
Yeah.
It's giving back to others.
Teaching them that mindset of they have the right to choose how they're going to respond, and they need to be givers, and they need to transform their nations.
Yep.
So yeah, I'd say Chris is one of my biggest heroes.
That's awesome. Well, thank you. This is one of my favorite podcasts, so thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's been great spending time with you, my friend.
Wow, what an incredible conversation. Thank you, everybody, for listening to Resilient. As I've talked about before, although we don't talk about it a lot, this is a Deloitte podcast, and it is produced by our friends at Rivet Radio. You can hear us by going to Deloitte.com, or go where I go. Go to your podcatchers, places like iTunes and Stitcher and SoundCloud and all those cool places. And when you go there, just put the keyword in resilient. And I'd also encourage you to check out previous episodes. We are really coming up with a great library of conversations, authentic conversations with CEOs, board members, and leaders. And also hit me up on LinkedIn and Twitter. You heard at the beginning how I connected with Dr. Dan Diamond through LinkedIn. Social media works, so provide me with your comments. Give me recommendations for future guests. Even if you're one of those future guests, hit me up on social media. My profile is under Michael Kearney. Last name is spelled Kearney. On Twitter, it's mkearney33. You know how Twitter works. It's hard to get a good handle. So now I have mkearney at 33. I wish it was just mkearney, but 33. And so if you like these conversations, this is where now I've given you about 15 episodes. If you like these conversations, please share it with your friends or your colleagues at work, or even your family members. Like I've talked about before, my sister actually even likes this, and she's an art teacher. Finally, I would be so grateful if you could just spend 1 minute and provide us with a rating. Go on to iTunes, where I think most of you guys get the podcast, and just rate us. It is so important in driving traffic to Resilient. And remember, leaders who embrace risk, improve performance, and are more prepared to lead confidently in the volatile world we live in.